morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good day so far. Today, we will discuss or we talk about managing changes in mega project. We will talk about variations and what is variations, the time and cost impact of variations, and some live chronology about variations. Okay, variation is a change that occurred in the contract, whether it is in the scope, it can be in the time, it can be in the cost. It may include an addition or omission in the contract written agreement. This variation had to be documented. This variation had to go through the change management system of the project. Okay, so a variation either can be a change, as we said, in the scope. It may include additional work. It may include omission of work. It may include change in specification or even change in the sequence that the works is being performed. And this is something that many people don't know. So when the baseline project of the contractor is approved, the change in the sequence might be a variation order in the contractor contract. Variation can include substitution or alteration to the agreed work. It may also include omission or addition to the agreed work. So variation procedure according to FIDIC and ICC can either go through a proposal or instruction. So if it was an instruction, in this case, or if we start, with a proposal, then the engineer will send the contractor a request to change certain item. However, the clear scope of the variation is not clear. So in this case, the engineer or the employer requests the contractor to provide a proposal how this variation will affect its scope or its contract. So the contractor in this case had to respond in writing with a written proposal, or if he wants to decline the work, he had to clarify why he is declining this variation. And in this case, the contractor had to specify in writing technical reasons why he is declining the work. If the variation was an engineer instruction, in this case, the engineer sends an instruction to the contractor to implement immediately this variation. In this case, the contractor had to go and proceed and comply with the engineer's instruction and proceed immediately with the works. Also, if the contractor wants to deny the engineer's instruction, in this case, the contractor had to clarify the reasons behind rejecting this instruction. He had to confirm either this scope of work is out of his technical capacities, or he had to provide a certain causes related to safety or quality issues that he cannot meet. The contractor shall determine the time and cost impact of the variation that he's going to execute. So as we said, if for the cost impact, the contractor needs to start by submitting his proposal or his cost impact assessment. The rates and prices that the contractor will implement in his cost impact assessment shall be generated from his original contract. In this case, the contractor, if the contract or the scope has a similar scope in his contract, he needs to use the BOQ item. If not, he had to go to the SOR rates or the price analysis rest or the rates breakdown he had provided during the contract or the tender or prior to the contract signature. If not, in this case, the contractor needs to submit proposals and offers, and at least in this case, he needs to submit 3 proposals or offers from a suppliers or nominated subcontractor or subcontractors, depending on how the work is going to be executed. After that, the rate and prices shall be always in alliance with what is mentioned in the contract and in BOQ. The engineer will review these rates and prices, and the engineer will issue an approval or will reject the contractor's proposal or will comment on the contractor proposal. And in this case, the contractor needs to reply to the engineer until the variation or the cost impact assessment grant the employer approval. For time impact assessment, the contractor shall give notice as soon as he is aware of the change or the variation, and this notice, according to FIDIC, shall be within 28 days. In other contracts, might have another time bar. The time bar legally might not be binding. However, in contract and under FIDIC, under ICC, it's binding. The engineer or and after he providing this notice, the contractor within 42 days or after a practical period shall provide all the needed particulars with all the supporting document and substantiation to the engineer or to the party who is nominated in the contract to review this document. The engineer shall respond to the contractor query within 42 days. However, there is no circumstances if the engineer did not comply with this time bar. However, if the contractor did not comply with the time bars, he might lose his entitlement to be awarded the time and the associated cost with the time extension. And again, this is binding in the contract. However, legally in many civil codes, it's not binding. Okay, then the engineer send his recommendation to the employer. The employer may, to the contractor, sorry, the contractor may approve the engineer recommendation or may send a notice of dissatisfaction against the engineer evaluation. In this case, the engineer within certain time has to issue a determination against the contractor notice of dissatisfaction. Should the contractor still dissatisfied with the engineer's decision, then this whole issue will go under to the dispute resolution procedure in the contract. However, throughout this cycle, the contractor should proceed with all his obligations under the contract and should not delay the work, nor stop the work, nor have the work affected by this process. And even the contractor is obliged to provide any mitigation effort that could ensure that the variation impact on the project will be to the minimum. And the contractor should provide all the substantiation that confirms this mitigation efforts. Okay, for time impact assessment, the contractor may implement different techniques that are defined under different international standards like the SCL or ICC or others. For example, the time impact analysis, the collapsed as built analysis, longest path analysis, as planned versus as built, window analysis, or impacted as planned analysis. Those analysis techniques might be retrospective or prospective, depending on the procedure or the technique that this analysis is being implemented. For time impact analysis, for example, it is a prospective analysis where you examine the impact of each delay event individually into the project through a time slice period in the baseline project or in the revised baseline project. In the as planned versus as built, you compared certain windows planned versus the actual execution, and this is this is one of the retrospective techniques. Prospective means that we're looking into the future. Retrospective means we are looking on what had been achieved and what was the impact during the execution. In both cases, we are creating a prototype. However, this prototype might look into the future impact of the delay. However, in the retrospective, it actually examined how did the delay affect, the schedule or the project in the past. Provisional sum items. Provisional sum items always are debatable in the construction industry, especially when how the provisional sum should be activated or initiated is not defined in the contract. Usually, provisional sum items are actually defined in the contract or included in the contract when we have a certain scope that is not detailed enough. For example, we need to execute a certain restaurant, but we don't have the detailed design for it. Or we need to execute an infrastructure project, some area from exchange to exchange, and we don't know the details related or the levels related to this specific area. In this case, we include a provisional sum item, which is a total lump sum figure that will be assigned in our budget to execute this scope. This provisional sum item or the initiation of the provisional sum item should start from the engineer by instruction to the contractor to start using this provisional sum item. And it is very important to highlight here that the cost of the provisional sum items might be utilized in full during the project life cycle or might be utilized partially through the project life cycle. So it's not necessarily while we execute the provisional sum item, we will utilize in full the value that is associated into the provisional sum item. Also, the provisional sum items might not be actually executed at all. So it might be assigned in the contract, however, it might not be used. The duration assigned to the provisional sum items also might be included in the baseline schedule of the contractor and might not be included in the baseline schedule in the contractor, depending on how the parties will agree on this area or how the contract or defined how this time bar related to the provisional sum item will be included in the contract. According to FIDIC and ICC, the provisional sum item scope and time related to it shall be addressed in the contract. And how do we deal with the time and cost associated with the provisional sum item due the project life cycle should be also included in the special conditions of the contract, because there is no general term in the contract that defines clearly how we deal with the cost and the time associated with the provisional sum item. And why? And as a best practice related to the provisional sum item, it is always advisable to have a clause in the special conditions of the contract that clearly defines how the cost of the provisional sum items will be introduced to the budget and how the time against the provisional sum items will be dealt with, and when the contractor should include the time related to the provisional sum item in his schedule, and how the cost will be added to the budget once the details are being defined and the scope is clearly detailed. The provisional sum items can be defined or undefined. For example, if I have a certain equipment I need to install in the project, I have the number and the quantities of the equipment that need to be installed. However, I don't have the certain specifications and the certain locations of this equipment. In this case, this is a defined provisional sum item. Some further details need to be added. For the undefined, I don't know anything about the scope associated with this provisional sum item. And in this case, I need to have the details will be clarified during the life cycle of the project. Another example, as we said, if I have a restaurant, I'm building a hotel and I have a restaurant in this hotel and I don't know what are the details, or I don't have the detailed design for this restaurant. In this case, this is undefined provisional sum that is related to execution for a certain item, but I don't know any details about it. And why we consider a provisional sum item in the change part of the change management of the project, because actually the provisional sum item might include a variation or a change to the project. Because once I receive as a contractor the instruction from the engineer to initiate the provisional sum item, I have to declare clearly the detailed cost breakdown and time impact of the provisional sum item. And if this is not in alliance with my contractual time and cost budget, in this case, a variation or the provisional sum item will go through the variation process of the contract, which we discussed in previous slides. So again, the provisional sum activation will be initiated by instruction to activate the provisional sum item. Then the contractor will set a detailed cost breakdown and time impact assessment. This will go through the variation procedure, which include the BOQ rates, SOR rates, and offers and proposals. Then the engineer will review and go through the approval process, and then the employer will issue the variation order or the provisional sum item approval to the contractor. This is an example how the provisional sum items can be included in our BOQ rates. And some examples of variations. In this airport, this is an airport in Jordan where the luggage system had been changed completely in the project, and we had to go through this variation process. The critical issue was about the variation. This variation is the time, because this is a long lead item, which is the luggage management system, and it was introduced to the project at very late stages. The contractor had to go through the time impact assessment, and there was some cost associated with this variation because the contractor had to change the procurement process for this system, and therefore this variation included time and cost impact that affected the project. This is another example in infrastructure project where this intersection had changed fully into a roundabout. This variation was a mega variation. The value of this variation was more than 25% of the value of the project and included major changes to this intersection. And it included many details, infrastructure works, road works, and accessories and street furniture. So this variation went through the instruction procedure where the engineer issued an instruction to the contractor. The contractor complied with the instruction of the engineer. He sent a detailed cost and time breakdown to the engineer. The engineer reviewed this cost and detailed time breakdown, and after a long negotiation process, the variation was approved with a huge value, which was around 150 million. This is another example of a variation where also it went through an instruction. This is an example of how the details should be provided once the contractor provides the variation cost impact assessment, where the details should be defined. It should be referred to a certain BOQ items where the item or the cost had actually, or the rates had been actually referred to or extracted. Also, if the contractor refers to certain SOR, he should refer to the SOR item that he referred to, and the details breakdown should be provided. Also, this is an example how the time impact can be provided, where the delay event must include a WBS, separate WBS in the impacted schedule, and the details of the fragments of the event that is included in the time impact assessment should be defined, and the start and finish date of each delay event must be clearly defined and substantiated with a certain substantiation documents, either the work request or the RFI or any similar document that will define clearly the start and finish date of each event in the variation or each activity in the variation. Thank you so much. You can scan here to claim your PDUs. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask any questions.
On behalf of PMI KSA chapter, we would like to thank you and express our gratitude for you coming and taking from your time to really share this. It's really something that we are proud of.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. And this is something very simple from PMI, expressing our gratitude for you.
Thank you so much.
And we hope to see you next year as well.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Hope as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Sora.